Hello everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel. This will be my first YouTube video, so I welcome you all. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about training. I've been seeing a lot of misinformation online recently, and I thought I might add a video into the ether and see if I can educate some people on how to actually train properly. So in this video I'll be going through how to bias every single muscle that you might want to bias in the body. Of course there'll be some that I miss out just because I don't care about them, and I don't think anyone else will either. So of course these will be small muscles, but that's besides the point. So I'll get into it right about now. So I wanted to start off pretty much top to bottom chest. So the chest is made up of three sections: the clavicular head, the sternal head, and the costal head. Typically people group the sternal and the costal head together because they have largely the same function. So for the purposes of this I will so too. So to effectively hit all three heads of the chest, you'll want to do something which involves horizontal shoulder adduction, which is moving your arm towards the midline of your body. So think when you do a pec fly, which is a good exercise for this, or a chest press, or even a bench press, but obviously if you're doing this then it's up to you. So you need to keep in mind that this hits all three heads of the chest. So you'll do a pec fly, a chest press, or a bench press, something along those lines. And I'd say don't do more than one, because when training you want to limit the amount of redundancy you're doing, which is you're doing the same thing more than once. Next, a lot of people like to bias the clavicular head of their chest, the upper chest. It does shoulder flexion, so what you'd want to do is something like a low to high fly, or you can do an incline bench or an incline Smith. You need to make sure that your arms are tucked into your side, because this is how you ensure proper shoulder flexion instead of shoulder adduction. Now I want to move on to back training. So with back training, it's made up of many muscles, and I'll tell you how to hit them effectively. So for the latissimus dorsi, for the lower lats, you can do a frontal shoulder adduction, so pulling your elbow from a high position down into your hip. So for this I like to do a lat pull down. Now when training the lats, you need to keep in mind that you don't have to go all the way down to your chest like many people have been told. This is old propaganda of a full range of motion, but the thing is, range of motion is largely arbitrary. So in a lat pull down, at the very top of the movement, above 120 degrees of shoulder extension, you are now primarily using the lower pecs for shoulder extension to move it back down, and then when you're going down all the way to your chest, your arms are going to be flaring out, and you're probably going to be doing some scapular retraction, which is a function of the traps. So at the very bottom you'll be involving your upper back, and at the very top you'll be involving your lower pec. So what I like to do is I like to pull down to about, mouth, nose, eye height, on my face. I don't go all the way down, just enough to keep my arms straight. Then to hit the upper lat, you want to do something which involves shoulder extension. So with this you'd want to do a close grip row, where your arm is tucked into your body as you row, and you want to pull just to your torso. Don't want to go any further back because that'll involve your upper back, so you just want to pull to your torso, and that'll hit that pretty effectively. Then what I'll train next is my traps and rear delts. Yes, your rear delts are a part of your back, even though they are part of the deltoid muscle group. So what I like to do for these is I like to do a row where my arms are at 90 degrees. And when you're doing this, you want to involve scapular retraction. You want to pull your shoulder blades back, because this is what the traps do. As you are rowing, you want to retract your scapula and then pull. Then what I like to do is, once I've hit failure on my row, I'll go back down and I'll do only scapular retraction, because the traps are a lot bigger than the rear delts. They'll fail after they do. So what I like to do in that case is do what's called a Kelso shrug, where all you do is you hold on the handle and you just retract your scapula. That's all you do, no movement of the arms, and I do that until those reach failure. That's pretty much all I care to do for the back. Next I want to move on to the deltoids. So I'll talk about the lateral deltoids and the anterior deltoids, or the side delt and the front delt. So the side delts do shoulder abduction, so what you'd want to do for these is a lateral raise of any variation. You know, cable, dumbbell, machine, doesn't really matter. As long as you're doing shoulder abduction, you will hit the side delts pretty well. Next to the front delts, you'll want to do some shoulder flexion. So what's really good for these is a shoulder press. Some people say you should only do a top half range of motion on the shoulder press to only hit the front delt, but this is sort of a flawed idea, and I'd sort of rather just do a full range of motion on the shoulder press, because some extra side delt activation is not the end of the world. Next I want to move on to the triceps. Now the triceps, all three heads, tricep, three heads, all have the function of elbow extension, but the long head of the tricep also has a role in shoulder extension. When you are doing, for example, a dip where your arm is moving, this is doing both things at once, so it's disadvantaging the long head because that one joint is shortening and the other is lengthening, and it's not doing anything. So if you're doing something like a dip, this will only hit the medial and the lateral head of your tricep. Now the long head is still very important to hit, so you should do any push down variation where your upper arm is not moving, it's by your side. So this can be a rope push down, a V-bar push down, a straight bar push down. If you'd like some extra volume on your triceps, then you can do a push down and then a dip, but more than that is pretty redundant. And now I want to talk about the elbow flexors. So there's 3 elbow flexors, and I'd personally only bias 2 of them, but if you want to go the extra mile, you can bias all 3. So the first one I want to talk about is the brachialis. So a lot of people, we hear people saying, oh, do hammer curls for the brachialis. Well, hammer curls aren't really great. The philosophy behind a hammer curl is you're disadvantaging the bicep by pronating your wrist, but the thing is, when you're doing a hammer curl, the more protracted your wrist is, the less bicep it is. But a hammer curl is only going, you know, halfway. So for the brachialis, actually, the brachialis works well in a just doing normal elbow flexion while your shoulder is flexed. What you want to do is to effectively bias the brachialis. You do something like a preacher curl, where your shoulder is in a flexed position and you do elbow flexion. So that's good for the brachialis. Then the bicep for this is elbow flexion with your shoulder either neutral or in an extended position. So this can be something like pretty much every curl variation. I personally do recline curls because I like to have the bench behind me, or you can do something like a Bayesian curl where you're in an extended position. Those are also pretty good. So you can do any curl where the arm is by the side of your body, and yeah, that'll hit the biceps pretty well. Then this is optional to bias. There's a brachioradialis, which is mostly located on your forearm. This is hit best when you're doing elbow flexion when the bicep is disadvantaged. So I was talking earlier about the hammer curl not disadvantaging the bicep very much. If you fully pronate your wrist, you have your palms facing towards the ground fully, and then you grab onto a cuff or a bar or anything, and you curl up, you're doing a reverse curl, and that's pretty good for the brachioradialis. So that's elbow flexors. Next I want to talk about forearms. So to hit forearms, you have to do their main function of wrist flexion and wrist extension. So how you do this is you grab a dumbbell in both hands or a barbell, and you'd go over a bench, you'd put your hands over it, and for extension you'd go up, and that's extension. And then for flexion, you turn your hand around so your palm is now facing the roof, and you'd curl up. No movement other than the forearm, and that's flexion. So forearms are very easy to hit, and that'll be upper body done. Now I want to move on to the lower body. So the first thing I'll do is I will do what's called a stiff leg deadlift. So the reason why I do this is because it has great activation in the hamstring and the glutes, while also involving the spinal erect, which are a muscle which runs all the way from the bottom of your back to the top of your back. So yes, this is also technically a back exercise, but I like to include it with legs because it's hitting quite a lot more hamstrings and erectors. But so you can do an SLDL where you keep your legs as straight as possible, and then you grab a barbell and you just go all the way down, hinge at the hip up, then back down, hinge back up, and that'll do everything pretty well. Or you can do any kind of hip hinge, you know, just anything where you're hinging at the hip. that'll hit everything great, you know, your erectors, your hamstrings. Next, what I like to do is I like to hit a leg extension for the quadriceps. So all 4 quad heads perform knee extension, but only the rectus femoris does hip flexion as well. Now, when you're doing a leg extension, you're not moving at the hip, you're only moving at the knee, so this allows the rectus femoris to work because it's not being shortened at one joint and lengthened at one joint. So only the leg extension will hit all 4 heads of the quad. So I like to do that for the quads. Next, after that, I don't personally do this, but you can do some glute isolation. So you want to perform the glute's main action of hip extension with something like a hip thrust. That'll be really good. Next, you should do some hamstring isolation with its primary function of knee flexion, so you should do a leg curl. Then, after this, I like to do some squats. Now, squats are really good for the quads, but only for 3 heads of the quad, because as mentioned previously, in a squat, you're doing knee extension and hip flexion. So this will lengthen the rectus femoris and shorten it, and it's not going to be trained very well. So I like to do both. I like to do leg extension and then squat, and you can do any squat you like. I personally do a hack squat, but this can be anything. Next, I'll move on to the last 2 muscles. So these are quite small muscles, which I personally don't hit, but if you feel you want to, then you can. So we've got the calves, specifically the gastrocnemius, and you'll train this through its primary function of plantar flexion. So you do this by doing a straight leg calf raise. So something like stepping on the donkey kick and going up. And when you're doing these calf raises, you only really want to do the bottom range of motion. So going from a fully down to just about the middle, because when you go up, it's not really the gastrocnemius. So just from the bottom to the middle, and that's 1 rep. So only do the bottom range of motion. As I said at the start, range of motion is largely arbitrary. And then finally, lastly, I want to touch on the abdominals. So here you've got the abs and the obliques are the most superficial ones. So the abs you want to train through spinal flexion, so flexing the spine down. You'll do something like a cable crunch, where you just crunch. So you can do a crunch machine, basically just crunch, right? So that's how you hit the abs. And for obliques, you do by just twisting the trunk, twisting the torso. So you can do this by going on a pec deck, having both hands on one handle and twisting towards the middle. Or you can go into a crunch machine and go to one side, go back up. This will hit the obliques pretty well. And now that'll round out my video. I thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope people can take some pointers from this video and implement it into their own training. I purposely have left out any advice on training split, frequency, volume, because frankly that's a discussion for another video. And this video is already long enough, and I don't want to make it longer. So this is me ending the video off. Thank you all for watching, and I guess I'll see you in the next one.